And we're back. Welcome back to the Cloudcast. I'm your host, Brian Gracely, along with our new monthly co-host, Brandon Whichard from Software Defined Talk. Brandon, how are you, man? How are things in Texas?
Things are fantastic. It's basically fall. Football's back, so I'm in a great mood and ready to talk cloud news of the month here.
Yeah, no. So another cloud news of the month. We're actually going to publish this a week late. We had some scheduling conflicts and some technical challenges from people who've been doing technology for a long time. Before we jump into cloud news of the month, as we mentioned in the last month, we are now officially into college football season, which means you and I are completely split-brained in terms of our focus on life. What anything interesting in the first sort of week and a half of college football, or anything in the next, before we talk to people again in a month, that you are excited about?
Well, I'm always excited, because there's always a lot of hope at the beginning of every college football season, much like there's always hope at the beginning of any corporation where they lay out the strategy and you're like, okay, sounds reasonable. Everyone's read it over. The VCs agreed. And then, of course, you go out and try to sell a product and nothing happens. And so the college football equivalent of that this year is Florida State, right? After an entire offseason of being considered one of the best teams in the nation and left out of the college football playoff, everyone predicted them to do extremely well. And of course, what did they do? They came right out of the blocks, went 0-2, for the most part, destroying their season and, crushing their fans' hopes. So I kind of feel like there's an analogy there, right? Between sort of corporate strategy and college football. It's like, you can talk all you want, but eventually you, in the case of our world, you have to go sell something and convince users to buy it. In the case of college football, you have to go win some games. And sometimes it just doesn't happen.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. My thing I'm excited about is we're now a couple of weeks into the season. Like you said, there's a lot of teams that have high expectations or certain expectations for their team, as anything does for something new. This could be soccer, this could be a new product launch, whatever. And a couple of weeks into it, when your expectations are not met in a striking way, right? Your team is bad in a striking way. The immediate conversation is all about let's fire the coach, right? Let's can the coach. And then my favorite part is just the conversation doesn't go to how will the team be? It is, how much do we have to pay this person to go away, right? What are the obscene amounts of money that are still on this person's guaranteed contract? And so, for example, I saw one that was, I think, University of Florida would owe their coach $26 million to go away. I think I saw Florida State is $71 million to go away last year. Oof. In your part of town, they paid Jimbo Fisher, $150 million to go away. Yes. And I feel like this leads to, so I feel like every time you come on, we have some really good in-depth lesson learned to pass along to people. And I think the first story we're going to talk about in sort of cloud news is about Intel and the struggles at Intel. And we don't want to make light of layoffs at Intel and so forth, but I think it does highlight a really important thing is anytime in life you get an opportunity to get the really big job, right? So, Pat Gelsinger at Intel, or a coach going from a smaller job to a big job, whether you are qualified, maybe you are, maybe you aren't, maybe the situation looks impossible to solve, but always take that job, because all you have to do is one time, for one game, for 1 week, for 1 year, is show some sort of promise from absolute despair. And those people will immediately give you a guaranteed contract for insane amounts of money, right? So Intel, as an example, is, going to go through some stuff, as we say, but Pat looked great for that first year, $140 million of guaranteed, sort of first round bonuses. Mm-hmm. These coaches, they may not win another game this year, but, someone's going to give them $70 million to go live in a lake house or a beach house or do whatever. So that's my tip of the month is, anytime you get a chance to get the big job, whatever that might be, take it and work your butt off for that first year to prove that you have some, purpose of life, that the thing can get better from the despairs that they hired you for. And then don't worry about the rest of it, right? Get that thing guaranteed, and then don't worry about the rest of it. If it works, it works. And if it doesn't, well, that's their fault for, giving you that money ahead of time. I think the parallels are there.
I'm awaiting my opportunity to be given the chance to take the $100 million job and to go for it. So I'm always prepared. If anyone's listening, I'm ready to go. I have the PowerPoints ready. I can jump right in and take the incredibly high paying job at a moment's notice. Just call me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel like this month we shouldn't spend a lot of time kind of going through all the stories. It's August. It's September. We're covering August. Summer is always notoriously sort of slow in the tech world. The fall will kick in. September, October, November will be great. I feel like there was like 3 or 4 sort of big stories this month, or there's 3 or 4 kind of big things to pay attention to. I think the first one is Intel. So let's do a quick summary of what's going on at Intel. A couple of years ago, they bring Pat Gelsinger back. He lays out this grand plan to how to save Intel. Intel, in essence, went from the biggest chip company in the world to sort of missing mobile. Then they decided to continue down their path of being, we're going to be a sort of full service chip company. We're going to, design them. We're going to manufacture them. We saw the world move toward fabs like TSMC. They sort of missed that. They sort of missed GPUs, and Pat was going to come in and save the day. And, 2 or so years later, they announced, unfortunately, this last month, I don't know how quickly they'll implement it, about 15,000 people are being laid off. They are beginning to do the thing where, whether Pat's initiating it or not, Intel's board is looking for alternative forms of funding. We saw some stuff this last day or so where they're looking at potentially selling off some companies. Where do you see Intel going from here? Because it feels like a very challenging situation, right? They're not all in on GPUs like NVIDIA, and they're going through trying to figure out 5 or 6 different who are we? Are we fabs? Are we not fabs? Are we still doing CPUs? Are we not doing CPUs? Are we doing mobile? Are we not doing mobile? Where do you see Intel going from here? Because it does feel like a super, super complicated path forward.
It does, and I think if you go back 3 years, it's kind of, we're kind of joking about it though, but it does feel like the people that get hired at these jobs like sort of come in with tremendous confidence. A lot of times they will know the situation well, but they will often articulate a very complicated strategy, right? Yep. Around like how they're going to turn something around. I've seen this many times. I'm sure many people listening in their careers, and it's like you as a layperson or just anyone, maybe someone just works there, you're like, I don't necessarily have the ability to speak at this level, or like I'm not this charismatic, but I'm pretty sure what the person just said is too complicated to be done. And I think that's ultimately where you kind of hire the person, because this is something I always think about boards of directors, just like fans, the reason you hire and fire coaches is it's much easier to talk about people than it is to talk about like the true problems of a company. And I think nothing has really changed in the last 3 years. It's like Intel ultimately has to decide what is its next big bet. And it can't be 3 things. It can't be, we're going to be a great foundry. We're also simultaneously going to build the best chips, right? And we're also going to simultaneously build like the most low powered chips and use instruction set x86, right? You kind of have to figure out like which of those things. So I think it's left them. And this is where, I think Gelsinger basically said like, we're going to do all of that inside Intel, and it's all going to work because I've thought it all out, and he has a very complicated structure to do it. And I think it's proven that's not going to work. So I think going forward is like, that's really what this board of directors has to decide. It's like, you could either say, I'm going to be a foundry and sell that off and basically just build a foundry and be like, go head to head with TSMC. Going to be difficult, right? But there's some reasons that maybe, at least in the United States, that the government would want to help them do that, right? Sort of like national security issues. Then there's, x86, like this is the other thing. It's like, not like everyone's gonna be like, oh, Intel, everyone who works at Intel are idiots. It's like, not at all. Everyone at Intel is like super smart. Like this x86 business isn't going anywhere. It may not be as profitable as it was going forward, but someone's gonna have to manage that. And like, I don't know, maybe they can reinvigorate that. And then the final thing is like, does Intel want to become, if you will, a fabless chip designer, right? Around like building the next RISC or some type of power efficient instruction set, right? So that would be another bet. So out of this, you could probably say like, we're going to sprint out 3 different entities, and we're going to set up management structures and leaders that are just focused in on those. And we hope all of them are successful, but maybe more realistic, we hope one of them is successful. But we know we can't do it under this like incredibly obfuscated system of like, you're both the foundry and you're designing the chips, and of course like the way you manufacture chips is going to affect the chips that you build, right? You're not really being, if you will, competing in the market. So all those things have to be decided. And I think it's funny for a company that was sort of like, only the paranoid survive, right? That's the famous Andy Grove quote. Here we are. It's like even they have kind of found themselves in this situation. And they ultimately are almost like the founding of Intel was about selling off memory and committing to x86 a long time ago. We're talking like I think the 60s or 70s, right? That happened. They're basically at that same point again. So I don't know what they're going to do, but it's clearly they're going to have to do something like that. Or Pat Gelsinger is going to give even a bigger strategy discussion, and he's going to somehow convince everyone to keep it together. And in 3 years, we'll have the same conversation.
Yeah. No, I think they are ultimately running into, the really basic challenge, and we could probably point to, a dozen other companies who have gone through this that are, fairly diversified types of companies who basically are like, we want to compete everywhere. We think, again, maybe it's just on PowerPoint, but we've got lots of smart people. We think we could compete everywhere. We think we could compete in GPUs. We think we could compete in foundries. We think we could compete in chip design, all these things. And then you realize, like, in most cases, those things are all, what's the best word? Like, they're not complementary to each other. They're actually probably competitive to each other to a certain extent. And, it's not the exact analogy, but it would be the analogy of, like, if you had 3 different sales forces and you gave them 3 different quota systems, and the 3 different quota systems were designed that the only way that any one group could survive is if they ate all the food of the other 2 groups. Like, you're only going to get you're probably going to get bad out of all 3. And that's kind of where they are right now. And I think you're right. Like, they may have to break these up into 3 different companies, in which case they're starting from a small position to compete against at least NVIDIA and at least TSMC and to a certain extent ARM and whatever else. Or, maybe on the rosier side, you say, well, we're only going to bet on 2 things, and we're going to figure out amongst those 2 things which ones are the least competitive with each other that we could, if we just put our 2, if we just bet on just those 2 things, we could make the best of what we're doing, right? But it's got to be interesting. It's got to be really interesting to be over at AMD these days, because AMD is sort of in the same boat in that they have sort of pulled ahead of them in GPU or in CPUs. They're trying to compete in GPUs. I think that's still sort of a struggle for them, but they've got to be sitting there wondering, going, well, maybe we double down on, like, CPUs and some sort of ARM element, and we take, like you said, that big pile of compute that happens every single year at the cloud providers and enterprises and all sorts of places, and just, become number 1 in that, right? Kind of get back to their roots. So it's going to be interesting days, but it does feel like this is sort of coming to a head very quickly. It feels like it's a problem that won't get sort of resolved for the next few years, but it does feel like, maybe the next even few weeks or whatever are going to be huge decision points for Intel and kind of the future of a lot of the money in the chip industry. Because if you think about it, if you just think about, like, x86, probably just between AWS, Azure, and Google, there's probably $150 billion of compute spend every year that just the 3 of them do. Because you just look at their revenue numbers. Mm-hmm. And yes, more, little fractions of that are moving to things like ARM and other stuff, but they're still the biggest customers of, whether it's Intel or AMD. And you're like, I think that's probably still going to be the biggest part of where those companies grow over the next 4 or 5 years. I mean, AI is going to be what's going to be, but there's still a lot of workloads out there.
Well, for sure. Like, I think they hired McKinsey or someone to do it. So I think we can save the McKinsey executives a little bit of work. The consultants rather. It's okay. Step 1, you can put the x86 business that goes in the cash cow quadrant. Okay, so that's the start of your presentation. It's like, okay, we have a lot of money. It's not growing as fast as we want, but it's going to throw off money for a long time, right? So it's like, what do you want to do with that going forward? And that's, those are going to be all the meetings. And I think this kind of comes back to, it's more a people thing, though. It's like, Gelsinger was sort of brought back as the hero. Like, the old Intel person was going to, like, we're getting the band back together, we're going to restore the glory. So a lot of times those aren't the people that are positioned to come in and start taking it apart, right? They are usually the ones that have often made the most money, that are most, if you will, loyal to the old way of doing things, right? And it's like, it's not often that those are the people to lead these types of transformations. So interesting to see what happens. Yeah,
the last thing that sort of sticks with me, and I don't know if this is in any way accurate, this is just sort of my perception from seeing them from 50,000 feet away and all these sort of things. It does feel like the modern chip people, whether it's the Jensen Huangs of NVIDIA or the folks that run TSMC or whatever, are much more, I mean, obviously, brilliant technologists and so forth, but their focus seems to be on just ruthless capitalism, right? Like whereas I feel like Pat is still very much in the, I'm the smartest guy in the room. Like at a technology level, I'm the smartest guy in the room. I understand the chip industry. I understand the mechanics and the physics and the mathematics of all of it. And it just doesn't feel like he has that level of ruthlessness that's now sort of required to run, one of the 3 or 4 biggest chip companies. And I don't know that behind the scenes. I know I've worked at companies where Pat's there, and I know he's pretty tough on the engineering teams, but it just doesn't feel like, it feels like just a different level of, willingness to compete versus, like, oh, well, that's the way it used to be at Intel. I mean, we were just the smartest people and we focused on the right stuff. We won, right? So,
well, I do think, to be fair, though, I mean, I think he's probably, I don't know, I mean this in a complimentary way. I think he's probably adequately ruthlessness,
sure.
if you will. But I think at some point, like, you have what you have. He doesn't have the if you will, the weapons or the differentiation. Right. Because I think it's, NVIDIA, right? It's like, sure. Like, I mean, you and I can run NVIDIA at this point, right? It's just like, I mean, you have so much, if you will, product differentiation, and so many people want it. It's just, it wasn't that long ago, though. Remember, like, Jensen Huang was in the wilderness, right? I mean, it wasn't that long. So, and if it hadn't gone that well, people would probably say he's a horrible person to work for. He has 50 direct reports and like has no idea, and he's a micromanager. But when you make a big bet and you're very successful, now we're just like, he's very eccentric and he's a strong product leader, right? It's like the same person. It just sort of worked out one way or the other. So we'll see. I don't know. We'll see what happens. But they're gonna have to make some type of big bet, and it will take many years for it to pay off if it works out, right? Which is going to be frustrating for everyone that works at Intel and Intel investors.
Yeah. So second sort of big topic I had for the month that I wanted to kind of dig into, and we've talked about this a little bit, but it feels like we're sort of slowly getting towards this thing, which is NVIDIA just announced their earnings. They beat their earnings, and then they had sort of the classic. They gave guidance, and the guidance was good, but it wasn't good enough for Wall Street, right? And we've seen this. We've seen this a million times. We've seen this with AWS. We've seen this with Cisco back in the day. We've seen this with Microsoft. We've seen this with lots of things where they become the darling of Wall Street. Everybody has big expectations for the technology. They tell the world how the world's going to change, and obviously in their image and so forth. And then there's that first quarter in which it's like, oh, we had higher expectations for you than you did. And it does feel like NVIDIA is sort of at that stage of, like, I hate to use the word sort of like bubble around it, but there does feel like a few elements of it that, we're going to start kind of having accountability for them, right? Like they kind of came out and said, hey, we beat our numbers. They beat them considerably for the quarter. But they also said, hey, the next generation chip is behind schedule. We've got some issues with it. And again, we all know that, like, you never really give away how bad your issues are and so forth. And once those things kind of got announced, Jensen was like, it's your guys' fault that the stock market doesn't like me now, right? You guys set the expectations too high. You did this. Right. Everything seems good to me. So where do you, because I feel like this is right now, everything in the AI world is dependent on where, as NVIDIA goes, the rest of sort of this AI, whether it's buzz or trend or next generation goes, like, how comfortable do you feel that, like, they're going to continue to be sort of the Pied Piper of this, or that, I shouldn't even say that, like, how comfortable do you feel like they've got a path going forward that seems really accomplishable, or is it really, there's a lot of hype there and we're going to go through some bounces and bumps?
Well, I think for sure we're going to go through some bounces and bumps going forward. I think the thing that's interesting about it, and I think that's hard for all of us to predict, is sort of NVIDIA, although they probably wouldn't like this, they are the core infrastructure upon which all of this AI stuff is being built, right?
Right.
And what has not emerged yet, right, is like the super profitable business model that, like, whether it's Google or Azure or Amazon, no one has cracked that yet. But we all kind of collectively feel like, wow, there's so much good stuff. And I mean, just as a user, right, I feel like every few months things get better. Like, the AIs can do better stuff. It's easier to write code. It's easier to do these things. And it's like, so we kind of all touch this all the time. We're like, it is really good. It is really useful. But that doesn't translate into direct revenue. There isn't like a Google search or some kind of new business that's emerged out of this. And I think that's where probably Jensen Huang is probably frustrated. He's like, I'm just over here powering the future of everything, and you guys are mad at me. And it's like, well, the reason is because we haven't connected yet, like, who's going to be the $1 trillion business on top of all of this? Like whether it's an ad business, whether it's us all just paying for these things. Apple's about to announce their new operating system, and it's going to have all these AI features in it. So that's probably the frustration he's in, is like, I have the best AI stuff, and no doubt he does. So give them credit. It's just there isn't a business model yet identified that's going to throw off billions of dollars. And I think that's why the whole market is sort of confused. It's like, unless somebody else is making tons of money, we're worried they're eventually going to not need you, is kind of what they're saying.
Right.
And and maybe, you've just sold a bunch of stuff that's going to sit, if you will, sit in a data center and relatively idle. And that's what we're worried about. And I think he doesn't have direct control over that. So I think he believes it's going to happen, right? If you listen to him, it's always about to happen. And he gives you like 100 different things. It's like, it's going to be refrigerators. It's going to do this. It's going to do this. And it's like, and I think he just has his conviction hasn't translated into hard business value above that. And who knows if it will, right? That's why I think that's what Wall Street's sort of saying. It's like, we just don't know. So we're taking a wait and see approach. So this quarter, even though you made however many billions of dollars, will penalize you a little bit. And we should also say, like, when we say penalize, I mean, this company is still like, the most valuable company in the world.
Right.
He's one of the most, he's like the richest or one of the richest people in the world. So it's like, you're not like, nothing's going bad. You know what I mean?
Well,
things are going great.
Yeah. And just in terms of purely the stock market, I mean, like, they made their numbers. I think they're down less than 10% from when they announced the numbers. I think it's maybe closer to like 7 or 8% or something like that. So, I mean, it's like, this wasn't a punishment, right? This wasn't, and I go back to this story that my mom, the sort of guidance my mom gave me, 30 years ago. She was basically a secretary or an admin, but she was in the tech industry, and I was first sort of coming up to it and was sort of learning about stock and this and the other. And she said, it's cool to be part of one of them that's growing really fast and it's really exciting. And she said, but if they ever miss, even if they miss the guidance by a penny, right? Like they didn't make the number, they said that's when the market just absolutely punishes them. Like, you go like, oh, but we missed by 0.0001%. And they're like, yeah. But that's not the way that we do the forward math, right? You're going to get punished by 30% or 40% or something. So I think the thing that's interesting about NVIDIA is, and you hit on a bunch of them. Number one, they don't really have a competitor, right? So, when they talk about being the best, there's kind of not a good second to sort of compare them to. And yes, I know there's, NVIDIA's trying to do stuff, or I'm sorry, Intel's trying to do stuff and AMD's trying to do stuff, but like nobody really considers them sort of like strong GPU competitors, at least especially in the AI space. So it's like, you're kind of on your own. And then the second piece is, like you said, they don't have any way directly to, at least the way they're doing business today, to drive what that business thing is, right? Like, I mean, if we're really honest with ourselves, like the reason that the NVIDIA stock price is the way it is because of something they didn't have anything to do with creating, which was ChatGPT. And you could argue, yeah, they did because they, their GPUs helped build it, but like they weren't directly involved with that. And if ChatGPT doesn't come along, their stock is a nice stock. It's a nice, post crypto stock, and it's whatever it is. And you start to wonder if, like back in the day when Intel was growing a lot, I'll use Intel as an example. You have to go back to like late 90s, early 2000s. I mean, they realized like, I need to create the things that will use my CPUs more than they do. I need you to stop using Office all the time, and I need you to start doing video. I need you to start doing whatever, right?
Yep.
And I do wonder and what ended up happening, and we saw this at Cisco as well, because Cisco had the same problem where they're like, people need to use the network more. I need more bits going across the wire to be able to drive faster network ports and all that sort of stuff. And they essentially became, huge. They became sort of a secondary VC market where they were like, I need to pump money into people that are doing things that are going to be the next use cases, the next cool application, the next driver of video, the next driver of bandwidth, the next driver of CPUs. And I don't know that, I'm sure NVIDIA has an investment arm, but I don't know that they've reached the point where they're like, oh, I have to be the demand driver. And I think they're probably going to have to start doing that pretty quickly, which will be an interesting thing because their requirements for returns are a little different than VCs who have shorter schedule. Like, NVIDIA, given what they have, can invest in longer term things to go, look, I know what my schedules look like. And so I think that might end up being I don't know, the sort of inverse to the VCs who are, all looking at it going like, oh, my companies aren't making that much money. All the founders are quitting and going back to work for those other companies.
The giant companies.
I think that'll be an interesting sort of thing to watch over the next year or so.
Well, to that end, reports are that OpenAI, another favorite topic of the show, right, is going to raise another round, like some absurd valuation. But NVIDIA is rumored to your point, like it looks like they're going to be like, hey, we believe you're they probably think behind the scenes like you're the best horse, right? You're the thing that's showing the most usage, so we definitely want to invest in you. And then Apple is also, reportedly going to take and potentially invest in it. So that would be really interesting. You'd have NVIDIA, Apple, and Microsoft all as major investors. And I think what you said before is true. It's like they're just investing in the thing that looks most promising, right? It's like OpenAI seems, and if or ChatGPT really is what they're investing in. It's like until such time that something else reveals itself, right? Until they're like, oh, this other thing. But I think I think one final thought on this, because I thought it was just an interesting thing. Fear not, don't feel too bad for the NVIDIA employees. So the survey was here. A June poll of NVIDIA employees showed that 76% were millionaires, and 1 in 3 had a net worth of more than $20 million. So for everyone that's working at NVIDIA, good job. It's like you won the video
on
game.
Paper. Yeah, at least on paper.
That's right.
Yeah, and you
like
you,
maybe
and
they
you
should
hope,
call your mom. Your mom should be giving out the advice. Be like, you probably should sell some of this.
Yeah, that's exactly. Having lived through Cisco at 90 and then Cisco at 9. It is weird.
It can change fast.
It can change fast, and the worst part is when it's going down. You're like, oh, it'll come back. It'll just come. Oh no, and that's at 75. No, it'll come back. It'll get it. Secure your future. Secure your next 2 generations' future. If you're sitting on 20 million or 50 million or whatever it is, but. All right, third thing I had on my list as far as like topics to talk about, and this is a smaller one, but I think it's an interesting one. So, new CEO at AWS, Matt Garman, who I think we're all still sort of learning to figure out like who he is, right? Like the people who had been around and dealt with a lot of EC2 stuff know him as, the kind of the original EC2 product manager. But he was never like a, keynote on stage person. He was never, super, super visible, kind of publicly. I think certain people knew him, and they're starting to make him visible now. Right. And, SiliconANGLE did a weird piece about him being the next Tom Brady, which you and I, an analogy didn't make any sense. And, but there was an interesting article where he made some sort of statement to internal developers. And again, this is the kind of stuff that you're never sure if it got taken out of context. But he basically kind of said, developers are going to stop coding soon because AIs are going to help them. And you're like, oh, okay, that's kind of a weird thing to say for a company who, everything was kind of built on builders, and, you're trying to keep driving builders. And then even within the SiliconANGLE article, he said this thing where he goes, yep, our bread and butter is like builders and startups and those sort of things. And it got me thinking this question. So you're coming in to run Amazon, right? You'd been around for a long time. You didn't necessarily get picked for the original job. The guy who tried to make it more enterprisey in Adam Selipsky kind of fell down or didn't move them the way they wanted to. Do you feel like, given how big they are and given the things that they're looking at, that this pushback to, we're targeting builders and we're kind of going after startups and so forth is the right thing to do? Or do you feel like that's how he sort of made his bones in AWS, and therefore you're going to talk about the thing that you know the most? And the reason I bring this up is I feel like it's super, super hard for anybody who is successful at one phase of a company to ever transition and run the second thing, because you're just have it in your mind of like the first thing that's the blueprint that just works for everything. And I feel like there are cases after cases that you tried to do something else, you tried to apply the same blueprint to it, and it's just a different scenario. It's a different, like the competitive situation of AWS or the competitive situation of AWS trying to do AI is so much different than it was when they were just like, nobody else does on demand and everybody hates their IT organization. So we're here, we're the Band-Aid for you hate your IT organization. I feel like, and again, this is where I go back to like, we don't really know much about this guy. We're getting these weird sound bites, but I do worry. My worry with him is not that he's couldn't be a great product manager, but is he trying to reinvent the second act using the first act blueprint, right? Like, is that where AWS is, or were they just, is it still day one at AWS and they just need to run the playbook again, just do it more vigorously?
Yeah, well, there's I worked in some organization where someone had this advice, was something like, when you get promoted, like one of the hardest things to do is to like resign your last job. Like
Yeah.
you can't do that thing before, right? And I think maybe before we even talk about Matt, maybe we got to go back to Jassy. Like, so one of the things that showed up this past month that was a really interesting read was Jassy posted, at least under his byline, about how Amazon used AI to upgrade the Java runtime, right?
Yep.
And within Amazon, and some questionable numbers. I think the savings was quite extraordinary.
$200 million.
I don't think it was
huge.
It probably wasn't that much, but it was still probably like there's some real truth in there, right?
Yeah.
But I thought it was really interesting because it's like, okay, let's start there. It's like Jassy runs Amazon, and like in our world, of course, like we care about this stuff, but like Amazon, right, as the retail site, it televises football games, like we like to talk about. It makes movies, on and on and on. So it's sort of like why is like, I don't think Jeff Bezos would have posted that. I don't think he would have ever gotten involved in, like, it would have been like, he would have told Jassy that's awesome. Great.
Yeah.
Go work with your geeks and put this on LinkedIn. I'm busy. I'm over here running this, world's largest retailer. And I think so you kind of see you kind of see both, right? And I think, Matt is really sort of the protege of Jassy, right? And I think it is. I think they are very much still stuck in their previous jobs. And like Slipsky, probably one day, 10 years from now, he'll write a biography and he'll be like, I came in, I tried to take it over, and Jassy just never left, right? And you actually read that some of the Amazon executives who've departed is they've said that, Jassy's a micromanager, right? There's been a bunch of like high level departures. I have no idea if any of that's true. I'm just saying, speaking broadly, it's just saying, so I do think, right, there's what there's what made you successful. It's your comfort area. It's the place where you can add value. I bet you Jassy knows a lot about upgrading that infrastructure, and he's just like, I can do it. I can put a lot of information, and he's right, but it's not, that's not your job anymore. Your job is running this whole other thing, and you got to let Matt run that, right? And I think same thing with Matt. I think, it's like, we'll see. I think I'm not really ready to like make a big opinion either way, right? I want to see what he does at reInvent, but I think that is the next stage, and I do think they are faced with a much different job. And I think this would be the honest truth. If you were having the meeting with like Jassy now, it'd be like, listen, you took it from 0 to 100 billion with a really nice runway in front of you around just doing infrastructure stuff. Exactly what the market needed. The organization was primed to deliver that. Things have radically changed since you left this job. It is now about AI. Yeah. We are significantly behind. We got called off guard. I mean, God forbid, I know I'm about to say something that everyone won't like, but like, what we were doing? We were listening to our customers. You know what our customers didn't talk about? AI, because they just literally didn't know they needed a chat GPT. They had no idea. So that's a weakness, right, of the strategy. And it's like, we got caught off guard. We're back now. We're going to build out, whatever the AI strategy is. And they've tried to keep saying that, but like, it is a much, much different job. So I think if you're Jassy and you're judging someone, you're like, you're always going to have this instinct of like, listen, I got this to $100 billion. Why are you ruining my business? Where they don't necessarily have like an outsider's view, but like, things have radically changed. Your business is still doing extremely well, but like, it's a much different job. So like, we've seen Slipsky, to resign to spend more time with his family, and we'll see what Matt does this time. But like on the third one, if there's a third leadership change, then we're gonna have to be like, maybe the people making the decisions, maybe the people picking the leaders need to kind of slow the roll a little bit. And that's really what's going to be fascinating to watch for the next year.
Yeah. Well, and I think I talked about this. I can't remember, you do a bunch of shows, you forget what you talk about, but I do think it is interesting to me that Andy is still kind of the big announcer of AI at Amazon, right? Like, hey, we're announcing, work with Anthropic, or, here's what, and you're like, yeah, you're right. Jeff Bezos would never have announced that stuff, right? Like, he only announced innovation versus, stuff that was like, cost savings or whatever it would be. But it does feel like it sort of undercuts whoever's running AWS, because you're like, those are technology things. Those aren't necessarily retail things. They're not necessarily like ad things. I mean, they probably are, behind the scenes, they're integrated and so forth. But yeah, you're right. It is sort of the old teacher doesn't want to leave the classroom, or, the old boss doesn't want to leave type of thing. I do think it signals, if anybody's, trying to figure out their dance card for the AWS reInvent, keynote and so forth, co-pilots will be, or, whatever they're calling them, queues or whatever at AWS, that's going to be the first thing they're going to talk about. And they're going to talk about it a ton, because they've figured out that's the one that's the one tangible place that is making money, that you can actually count people, that it's probably reasonably profitable from that perspective. Like that's the AI use case at this point. And so they want to at least highlight to the world, we use it, we're saving money on it, we're getting expertise on this stuff, and if we understand what we're doing, you should use ours versus the a dozen or so other ones that are out there. And it does sort of tie back to the thing that we talked about, which is like, what are the other use cases that NVIDIA is building the company upon? And if the whole industry feels like they are sort of centering around developer assistant copilots as like the proof point, it's got to be the other piece that if you're looking at it from an NVIDIA perspective, you're like, what's the second or the third or the fourth or I would hope you have 150 of these things. And so, I do feel like we're starting to see a little bit of intertwining between, sort of supply and demand on the AI sort of stuff. I think for all of us, we hope that there is more than one use case that pans out, because like you said, the technology is pretty powerful, pretty interesting. But yeah, if it's unprofitable, we'll go through some bumps before it works itself out. And it doesn't, it feels different than like when the internet stuff took off, when it never felt like we had, like, you couldn't get CPUs, but now it's like, well, we can't figure out how to make GPUs profitable yet, and you can't make enough of them to get them to a price point where maybe you can make it profitable. Like, what's going to be the breakthrough for that? And like that to me feels like the biggest question is like, not is the hype real or not, is like, can you get it to a price point where you can afford to make mistakes and experiment and all that stuff? And it doesn't really feel like you can do that at big scale today. And I may be wrong, but it does, at least the bits that leak out and the dots that you connect, it does feel a little bit like that, which might also be leading to the a little bit of the nervousness around NVIDIA.
Well, two thoughts before we move on here. Like, one, for those playing at home, I think, the teacher that won't leave the classroom, the direct analogy, or a thing that we all should watch at reInvent is, does Jassy show up at reInvent and do any announcement? Does he have, because that will be a great tell that like the teacher has not left the building, right? I think that's for sure. So I'm for sure going to watch that. And then, to your other point, and I think this is just the issue, and I think, we can look back on it and it's like, and we kind of forget, like we had the .com bust, right? And we all kind of lived through that. But then like all of these new businesses did ultimately emerge that only in retrospect seem obvious. Like the fact that like search wasn't a big deal, but then search led to like maybe the most profitable business of all time, right? And then of course, like nobody, like, really social media didn't really get going until like maybe like, I don't know, late aughts, early, and that was something else too. Like, again, we were thinking about like, oh, it's like, I don't understand. We put all the catalogs online and nothing happened. Well, it turned out like none of that was really profitable. It was all these other businesses, right? And I think that's kind of where we are. Like all the ideas right now, they seem crazy. Like I've read this one about like Friend.ai, where it's like, it's not about automating anything or making anything more efficient. It's just sort of like something to talk to that's fun to talk to. And it's like, when I say that out loud, everyone's like, I don't think I'd want that. That's crazy. That's sort of, a dystopian in view. And it's like, maybe, but it also may be like, well, who doesn't want to like ride home and just like talk to a hype man, someone telling you did a great job, or instead of complaining to a spouse, you'd be like, oh, work was bad, my boss was this, and it's like maybe that like these kind of far off use cases do emerge, right? And we're like, oh, it turns out we did all want that, but it will only be clear in hindsight. And then we're going to go through a bunch of bad ideas before we get there. And a lot of them, most of them will be bad. But something always happens. That's kind of my thing. It's like something always emerges, and who knows what it will be.
Yeah, no, I think what'll be interesting, and I'll wrap it up on this last one because we've been going for quite a while, is I think if you were to go back and look at the whole internet thing, and you sort of took some of the technology pieces away from it, because at the end of the day, we now can communicate. Okay, we've been doing that for thousands of years. We now can order things. Okay, we can buy things. We've been doing that for hundreds of years. We now can, travel. Like, we didn't reinvent the way life existed, right? Like the most basic human things, but we did them at such a scale and at such a price point that was so different, at least versus where it was, so like, for example, long distance phone calls used to be $20 a minute and now they're free and all that kind of stuff. Like, I think that's going to be what really interesting is who can figure out what the economics of a GPU centric world looks like. And I think right now we're still fascinated with like how big a model somebody can build, or something along those lines. And I think the breakthroughs are gonna be the people that figure out, how do I do the thing that looks like it would require a GPU, or maybe requires a GPU, but you're going to write your software in some different way, or you're going to create some user experience in some different way that totally breaks the economic model, which is basically what happened post the bubble burst. And that's going to be, I think, the most interesting thing. But we haven't really seen the beginning of that, right? I don't have any doubt that it'll probably work itself out. Competition tends to lend to that, but that to me is going to be really interesting. Is what does the economics of computing look like in a post GPU sort of world, right? Whatever that timing sort of looks like. So, all right, man. One last thing I want to do. If anybody is possibly listening this long, I listened to your show this last week or a week or so ago. Your co-host, our friend Cote, who for whatever reason I've never had a guest on the show. I know he's sort of mad at me about that. He needs some people to subscribe to his newsletter. He needs to get to 1,000. I think he's getting close to it. Let's help him out. Newsletter.cote.io. If you want really good insights into, some things going on in the enterprise world, the developer world, kind of wackiness around technology, go subscribe to newsletter.cote.io. That's right. That's the right URL?
That's 100% right. Cote would appreciate it. Get his numbers up.
So if you enjoy this show, if you enjoy Brandon being on every month and so forth, go do us a favor, go subscribe to it. You'll enjoy it. I think it comes, a couple of times a week. Lots of fun stuff, a little bit of a European flavor now that he's been living in Europe for a while. So, do that as a last minute thing, as well as signing up for, the SDT Slack and all the other things that we ask you to do every month. So with that, man, I'll wrap it up. A month from now, we will be into the middle of the college football season. We'll have lots to talk about there if there's no technology, but I suspect we'll have a little of both. We'll have a little bit of football and or a lot of football and a lot of technology by the end of September. So thanks for being on, man. Everybody, thanks for listening. Thanks for telling a friend about the show. Thanks for helping us grow the community. And with that, we'll wrap it up. We'll talk to you next week.